Greetings, booktubers, and welcome back to Grammaticus Books. And today we are going to be defending Robert A. Heinlein, or defending Robert A. Heinlein and his novel Farnham's Freehold. Farnham's Freehold, a science fiction book which is frequently labeled as the most controversial science fiction book ever written. And we're going to take that criticism, we're going to take it apart part by part, and see if it makes sense, if it's valid, or if it's not valid. So the way I'm going to structure the video is, I'm going to talk about what led me to read this book. We're going to go then into the plot of the book in some detail. We're going to cover it quite extensively. I'm not going to give away the ending or anything like that, but there will be spoilers, and more than just minor spoilers. And we need to do that in order to set up the background so that the critiques and the criticisms make sense. But there will be spoilers. You have been warned. At that point, we'll address the criticisms that get leveled against Farnham's Freehold, and I'll give you my opinions on whether those criticisms are valid or invalid. And then lastly, and most importantly, I'll talk about the book just as a science fiction novel by itself, push all the politics aside, and I'll tell you whether I thought it was a good science fiction novel or if it had problems as a science fiction novel. And I invite comments on all this down in the comment section below. But this is a Robert A. Heinlein book. It is a very controversial book. It is filled with Robert A. Heinlein's politics, as are almost all of his books. So when you go down to the comments section, please be polite in the comments section. Please keep your comments confined to the critiques of the book and what's in the book. Please don't go down there and set off a political firestorm. But I do invite counter opinions. If you disagree with my opinion on these critiques, please go down in there and say, hey, Grammaticus, I disagree with you because of A, B, and C. I love those types of discussions. Frequently, people writing down in the comments section bring up points on books that I completely missed or that I got wrong, and it educates me, and it makes for a lively discussion, and that's what makes for good booktube. So go down in the comments section, feel free to comment on it once you've watched the video, but keep the comments polite. So let's get into it. Farnham's Freehold. So what led me to read Farnham's Freehold? And the answer to that question is another Robert A. Heinlein book, Time Enough for Love. I read this book, I reviewed it here on the channel. I'll link that review down in the description below. If you want to go check out my full review on it, my in-depth review, click on that link and watch my video on Time Enough for Love. But this book has a reputation as being controversial, and it is. And I read it. It is a brilliant book by Robert A. Heinlein. It's a brilliant science fiction book where Heinlein takes a social taboo and he uses that taboo in a science fiction setting in order to make his social and political points. And he does it absolutely just in a fantastic and a genius manner until he gets to the last act of this book, Time Enough for Love. And then he pushes that social taboo just one step beyond, and it becomes very controversial. He takes it too far. But when I reviewed that book, down in the comments section, a number of people said, if you think Time Enough for Love is controversial, you need to read Farnham's Freehold. It is far more controversial than Time Enough for Love. And in fact, on some of my other Robert A. Heinlein videos that I had done, which weren't even about controversial novels, Farnham's Freehold would frequently pop up down in the comments section. So I always had that in the back of my head. And then about 2 months ago, I was out in the used bookstore and I found Farnham's Freehold. I pulled it out of the bookshelf, and right here on the front cover, it says science fiction's most controversial novel, right on the front cover of the book. And I'm like, okay, I have got to read this book. So I went ahead and I read it. I finished this up about a week ago. And when I read it, I purposefully did not read the back blurb, and I did not go out and look at any of the critiques or criticisms of this book prior to going in and reading it front cover to back cover. I wanted an untainted view and opinion of it when I went through it. So we're going to go through the plot now. I'm going to tell you the basic plot of the book here. Again, there will be spoilers, and then we're going to move into the criticisms. So Farnham's Freehold, the main theme of this book by Robert A. Heinlein, published in 1964, it is an anti-racism, anti-slavery, a novel by Robert A. Heinlein. I'm going to set that right there. And you would say, well, what's controversial about that? And I would agree, you've got a good point, but we're going to get to it. There are just tremendously vociferous complaints that get leveled against this book. But the book was published in 1964. It's set in 1964. And the book starts off in a household in Colorado that's headed up by Hugh Farnham. Hugh Farnham is our protagonist. He's our main character. And he is an elderly statesman, and he is the smartest man in the world, and smartest man in the room, pardon me. And yes, it is your prototypical Robert A. Heinlein protagonist, the elder statesman who's smarter than everybody else around him. And there with him in his household is his wife, who is hopelessly alcoholic. And I think that this character is an insert by Heinlein for his first wife, who was alcoholic, who he wound up leaving. And also there with him is his son, who's home from law school. He's a law student. And his daughter, who is home from college as well. And she has brought one of her sorority sisters with her, a very young lady, very young, attractive lady. And if you're familiar at all with Robert A. Heinlein and his typical novels, you can see where this is headed, and you're not wrong on that point. And then the last character here, the last main character in the book, is Joe. And Joe is a black male who works in the household for Hugh Farnham. Hugh Farnham employs him, he's an employee, and Joe helps out with keeping the household managed and running. So this is your setting. The book starts off with all these people here at the house in the evening time, and they are playing the card game bridge. Playing bridge in the evening, and the latest tensions between the United States and the USSR have been on everybody's mind, and so they decide to turn on the radio to see what the status of this current dust-up is. And as they turn on the radio, it immediately goes into a broadcast of the emergency broadcast system, which announces that nuclear war has started and that the Soviet Union has launched their intercontinental ballistic missiles, and that everybody needs to immediately take cover. And it's at this point that you learn that Hugh Farnham is also a doomsday prepper, and he and Joe have built a fallout shelter underneath the house. Now, this wasn't as unusual as a thing as it would be here in 2025 back in 1964. This was during the Red Menace. This is when people were living their lives on a daily basis with the scare and the threat of nuclear Armageddon. When I was a kid in elementary school in the early 1970s, our elementary school had a fallout shelter in the elementary school, and we did duck and cover drills. I mean, this was a very real fear back in 1964 when this book was published. So Hugh Farnham gathers up the entire group, including the household cat, and they all pile into the fallout shelter, and they shut the doors and they dog down the hatches right as the first atomic bombs fall. And 2 bombs hit that are near misses, but they set off a firestorm above the house and above the bunker. And this causes a severe problem for Hugh and the rest of the inhabitants here in the fallout shelter. The internal temperature of the fallout shelter begins to rise and slowly cook them. Now, Hugh's wife can't deal with it. She's mentally not capable in her alcoholic state of dealing with any of this, so they sedate her and they put her down to rest, and then everybody else has to start stripping down off of their clothes as the temperature, the physical temperature, rises in the fallout shelter, and the emotional temperature also rises at the same time here, and you get some social fighting over control in this apocalyptic situation. It turns into sort of a Lord of the Flies type of story at this point, a survivalist Lord of the Flies story. And also during this crisis, Hugh Farnham finds himself in close proximity with his daughter's sorority mate as they are stripped down to almost nothing, and the inevitable happens, as it frequently does in a Robert A. Heinlein novel, and he impregnates his daughter's sorority sister with twins. And this becomes one of the criticisms here in the book, and we'll address that in detail here when I get to the critiques of the book. So this is where we are in the novel when the 3rd nuclear bomb hits, and it is a near doomsday weapon, and it strikes directly down on top of the bunker. But instead of vaporizing everybody instantaneously, what it does is it tears a hole in the fabric of space and time, and it knocks the bunker 2,000 years into the future. It doesn't shift geographically, but it moves the bunker 2,000 years into the future. Then the inhabitants of the shelter emerge out into the world, and they come out expecting to find just nuclear devastation and waste all around them, a radioactive, a nightmare landscape. But instead what they find is a woodland idyllic paradise. They find a woodland paradise there in the hills of Colorado where their house was located. There's abundant game everywhere. There are lush green grasses and fields, verdant forests, pristine mountains, crystal clear mountain streams that are running. It is a natural paradise that they have emerged into, but there is absolutely no sign of civilization, and there is no sign of any other human beings. And they come to the conclusion that they are the last beings left on the face of planet Earth, the last human beings left, and it is up to them to reconstruct civilization and to repopulate the world, which is another feature, a common feature of Robert A. Heinlein's stories. And at this point, the story shifts from an apocalyptic survival tale into Robinson Crusoe, along with sort of Lord of the Flies, because you still have this social tension between Hugh and his other family members here in this tight-knit unit that is Farnham's Freehold. And just as Hugh and the rest of them are starting to get a grip and get a handle on things, are starting to have built the rudiments of civilization and can make life bearable, then they encounter the Chosen. The Chosen come down and they capture Hugh and his entire group. Now, who are the Chosen? The Chosen are the inheritors of the earth. They are the new world order that has emerged to take control of the entire planet. In the nuclear firestorm of 1964, the entire North American continent is destroyed. Europe is destroyed. All of Russia is destroyed. Asia is destroyed. The only continent that survives unscathed is the continent of Africa. And the black nations of Africa have banded together into one homogeneous national identity and have moved out and have taken over the world. And the Chosen now run the entire world under their new world order, which is a totalitarian slave state based upon the color of your skin. And if you are black, you are part of the Chosen. And if you are not black, you are a chattel and you are a slave. So Hugh and all of his family members are now taken into slavery by one of the nobility of the Chosen, who's known as Ponce, who is also known as his charity, because you live or die by his charity. You live and everything that you have is at his charity, or he can take it all away from you. And he was trying to manage and get his family into the most favorable conditions, the most favorable statuses, while he deals with Ponce, who Ponce is a very complex character. He's not a cardboard cutout villain. He has very many facets to his character. He is an enlightened slave master who treats Hugh with a great deal of equality, but he is still a slave. And as the novel progresses, you begin to learn that Ponce also has a very, very dark side to him, and that this slave state is absolutely brutal. And in this slave state, Hugh is now trying to fight for his family and trying to get them to freedom. And this, in a nutshell, is the plot of Farnham's Freehold. So what are the criticisms of this book? Well, the first criticism is that it's sexist. And to be honest, there's some teeth to this criticism. Hugh Farnham is the elder statesman, and he is pretty much worshipped by the younger women in the book. He's worshipped and adored by them. And this is a typical feature of Robert A. Heinlein novels. But in most Robert A. Heinlein novels, in addition to this group of young women that tend to adore the main protagonist, you also have very strong, exceptionally strong female characters in Robert A. Heinlein novels with a tremendous amount of power and a tremendous amount of agency. Except here in Farnham's Freehold, you don't have that powerful female character there who acts as an offsetting force to the protagonist. And it results in the female characters being there to just adore and dote on Hugh Farnham and to serve in sort of a domestic capacity. And it is actually a little bit of a sexist book. There actually is some teeth to that complaint. But that's not the main complaint that gets leveled against Farnham's Freehold. The main complaint that gets leveled against Farnham's Freehold over and over and over, and we're going to go into them, is that it is a racist book. It is a blatantly, openly racist book. And how can that be if this is an anti-slavery, anti-racist themed book that Robert A. Heinlein wrote? Well, I'm going to summarize the complaints that are brought against it instead of bringing them out one at a time, or we'll be here forever. But in summary, what the complaints say is that Robert A. Heinlein takes racism and he takes slavery and he takes it so far, he pushes the bounds of it so far that he actually starts engaging in racial and slavery stereotypes that in and of themselves then become racist. And this complaint gets leveled against Farnham's Freehold very vigorously and from numerous different quarters. And it is, I can tell you this, it is patently false. There is no truth to it at all. And there's two main reasons why this complaint falls flat. The first reason that this complaint falls flat is that the critics who level this complaint against Robert E. Heinlein and Farnham's Freehold are doing so from a U.S.-centric viewpoint. They're taking the experience of slavery and racism of the United States of America from the slavery of the 1800s up into the Jim Crow laws of the 1950s and 1960s and the social racism that was baked into the United States in the 50s and the 60s. And they're viewing it strictly through that lens. Instead, what Robert A. Heinlein has done is he's gone across the globe and throughout history in order to draw out the most heinous examples of racism and slavery and then place them here into the book in order to make the strongest case against history, against racism and slavery that he can make. And he uses examples from ancient Sparta, which was just a brutal totalitarian slave state, and from ancient Persia and ancient China, and from Africa as well. And so he has all of these examples in here, but the critics are looking at it strictly through the lens of the U.S. experience, and then they call it stereotyping because he has taken it to such a degree, to such an extreme, but he's not taking it to an extreme. And these were all practices that in fact are drawn out of history. They're very real, they're very prescient, and they're very pertinent to the novel here, and they make sense. So what's my second point as to why these criticisms fall flat? And the second point is because they are all originating from one side of the political aisle. And they're all originating from about the same time period here in the United States, from 2010 to about 2015. And you had some political events that were going on right around and were prevalent in that time period where it was sort of nouveau chic to level these types of complaints. And in my opinion, looking through and reading these articles from these critics, I think these critics were leveling their complaints more against the author, Robert A. Heinlein, than they were actually against the content of the book. I think they were finding things in the book in order to criticize it, not because they were upset with what was written in the book, but because they were upset with who wrote the book. And I'll go through a little bit here and demonstrate some points out of there in order to back up that assertion. So the first complaint you get is from 1964, and it's Kirkus Reviews. And Kirkus Reviews says that the book lacked inspiration. That was their summary on it. They didn't attack it back in 1964 as racist. They didn't attack it as sexist. They just said it lacked inspiration because at this point you didn't have these political and social forces that sort of came to a boiling point there starting around 2010 that sort of drove this narrative. Then in 2011, the journal SF site levels a lot of these racist complaints against the book, saying that it engages in these racial stereotypes and becomes a racist book. You also have The Heritage of Heinlein, which is a book that was written in 2014 that makes similar allegations against this book specifically. And then you have a British author who wrote a lot of popular science fiction in the 1990s. I'm not going to name him specifically, that wrote just a very aggressive article attacking Heinlein and attacking the book as a racist book. And then finally, you have the New Republic in 2014. You have that literary journal that writes a scathing review of Farnham's Freehold, labeling it as a racist stereotype and a very openly racist book. And again, the examples that they use in here, in my opinion, fall flat. They are non sequiturs in many instances. And I think that they are leveled more against the author than they are against the actual content of the book. I have a hard time having read through the book from front to back. Again, reading it through the first time without even realizing that these were the complaints that were going to be made against it. I got to the end of the book and I was like, I couldn't imagine, other than the sexism that was in it, how somebody would find something to label this the most controversial book in all of science fiction. It was a bit bewildering to me. And then when I read these reviews, read these journal articles, it was a bit eye-opening and a bit flabbergasting, to say the least. So one of the complaints that these reviews make is that the main character, Hugh Farnham, engages in the practice of eugenics, that he promotes eugenics. And this is just patently false. The main character does not engage in eugenics in this. He does talk about how he thinks modern society is being bred to be docile and just to go with the flow. But he's not talking about blacks, he's not talking about whites, he's not talking about Asians, he's talking about people. And that is not eugenics. That's not eugenics in the form of the definition that they're trying to push it into. And at the same time, the antagonist of the book, Ponce, his charity, does engage in eugenics, and Robert A. Heinlein uses Ponce in order to illustrate the ills of eugenics in the book. And so that criticism falls very flat. And then the last aspect that I'd have you consider as to whether or not Robert A. Heinlein wrote a racist book is Robert A. Heinlein's history in writing his novels. Robert A. Heinlein was putting minority characters into the lead roles as his lead protagonists in his books all the way back in the 1950s, and it was in some of his best-selling novels. Starship Troopers has a Filipino lead character in it. The protagonist, Johnny Rico, is a Filipino. His main protagonist in Tunnel in the Sky is Rod Walker, who is a black teenager. And the way in which Robert A. Heinlein used these main characters in order to combat racist ideals, racism in society in the United States was absolutely brilliant. He would put these characters, he would put you into their shoes, but he wouldn't give you any clue that they were minorities until he was over halfway through the book. And then he would just sort of casually mention it after you had identified and put yourself into their shoes and you were walking through the novel, looking at everything through their eyes. And it was an absolutely brilliant way for Robert A. Heinlein in order to combat racism all the way back in the 1950s when very few people were doing that. And for all those reasons is why I believe that those criticisms, other than the one of sexism, fall flat for Farnham's Freehold. But I would love to hear what you guys have to say. Do you agree with my points? Do you think that I've missed something? Go ahead and put it down in the comments section down below, but be polite. And now let's move on to the most important aspect of this video here. Is this a good book? Was this an enjoyable science fiction book to read? And the bottom line is, yes, it is. This is a fun science fiction book to read. It was a little bit like Peyton Place around a bridge game in the 1960s to start the book in the first 10 pages. And I was starting to have my eyes roll up in my head a little bit. But then the bombs start to fall. They literally start falling down. And from that point forward, you get an excellent science fiction novel, a great adventure tale of time travel, apocalypse, survival, going on here, social maneuvering within this totalitarian society, attempting to save his family. And it's an excellent and it's a very fun book. And it has some unusual aspects to it for a Robert A. Heinlein book. His main character, his elder statesman, Hugh Farnham, makes mistakes in this book, which never happens in any of his other books. His main protagonist, the elderly statesman, he actually makes mistakes dealing with his family, and he admits to those mistakes. And he gets outsmarted at one point in the book, which never happens in a Robert A. Heinlein book. It's a very enjoyable read. So do I recommend it? And that depends. If you've read Robert A. Heinlein before, if you like Stranger in a Strange Land, if you like Starship Troopers, if you like Robert A. Heinlein's Juveniles, and you know sort of what you're getting into with Robert A. Heinlein, then yes, I think you will enjoy Farnham's Freehold. Now, if you've read Robert A. Heinlein and you don't like it when he engages in Heinsplaining, where he talks down to the audience, thankfully there's very little of that in Farnham's Freehold. He tends to curb that back a little bit. There's still some, but if that irritates you, if the young females doting on the main protagonist irritates you, and some of the other aspects of Robert A. Heinlein's novels where he injects all of his politics into it, if that kind of grates on you a little bit, then you probably won't like Farnham's Freehold. If you've not read Robert A. Heinlein, then I would recommend not starting with this book. Don't start with this book. Start with his Juveniles. Start with Have Spacesuit Will Travel. Start with Tunnel in the Sky, and sort of slowly introduce yourself to Robert A. Heinlein. Work up to The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. And if you're enjoying those books, then I would recommend Farnham's Freehold. But again, that's it. I have rambled on long enough on this one. I'm going to have to wrap this one up and say take care, be safe, and I will catch you guys next time.